This easement is functionally part of our community now, and you will sign the release by Friday or we will record the lien ourselves. That was Delia Hartman, president of the Pine Hollow Owners Association for 9 years running, standing at the head of my own gravel drive on a Tuesday morning in the spring, telling me that the spring-fed water line my grandfather buried in 1948 belonged to her subdivision. Behind her stood a young sheriff's deputy she had called out to lend weight to the threat, and behind him, at the gate, my 15-year-old daughter Ray stood with her phone already recording, because by then we had learned to record everything. What Delia did not know, what she never once bothered to verify in the 4 years she spent escalating against me, was that the easement she wanted to absorb was a recorded water right older than her entire development, and that I had spent 31 years as a licensed land surveyor reading exactly the kind of instrument she had never thought to pull. She thought she was leaning on a tired old man at a gate. She was leaning on the one person in the county who could read her own filings better than her lawyer could. So let me ask you something, and be honest. If a woman in a hot pink blazer stood on land your family had held for 3 generations and told you that your own water was now hers, would you have signed by Friday or would you have started a folder? My name is Walt Crane. I was 62 that spring, a widower and a surveyor by trade, until my knees told me to stop climbing ridgelines for the county. For 31 years, I carried a license that let me set the corners other people argued over. I have stood in creek bottoms in January looking for a brass cap 100 years buried. And I have testified in 3 counties about where a line really runs versus where a man wished it ran. The work teaches you a kind of patience most people never need. You learn that the truth of a boundary is already written, decades before the argument, in a book in a courthouse basement, and all you have to do is go read it. My wife Carol passed 4 years before any of this started, a hard, short illness that took her in a single autumn, and the place she loved most in the world was our 40 acres on the north shoulder of Pine Hollow, where a cold spring rises out of the rock and feeds a line my grandfather laid by hand the year before my father was born. That water is the reason the land is worth anything. It runs clean and steady through the driest Augusts, when the wells down in the flat go to mud and the neighbors start hauling tanks up the county road. 3 generations of Cranes have drunk from it. My grandfather dug the line with a mule and a slip scraper in 1948, set it below the frost, and built a little fieldstone spring house over the head of it that still stands square after 70 years. Carol used to fill a blue enamel pitcher at that spring house every morning, carry it down to the kitchen, and set it on the windowsill where the light came through it. After she died, I kept doing it every morning because stopping felt like letting go of one more thing, and I was not ready to let go of one more thing. Ray was 11 when her mother died, and 15 by the spring I am telling you about. She is the kind of quiet that people mistake for shy until they watch her actually pay attention to something. She notices. She remembers. When the trouble started, she was the one who suggested we keep the footage on 2 drives instead of 1. Because, she said, a thing on 1 drive is a thing you can lose. She was right. She was right about a great many things in those 4 years. And I have come to think she learned the watching from her mother and the writing down from me. And that between the 2 of us, we raised a girl who would make a formidable witness someday. The Pine Hollow subdivision went in below us about a decade back, a cluster of big new houses on what used to be the Mercer cattle pasture. Old Tom Mercer sold out when his knees went and his sons went to the city. And I did not blame him, though I missed the cattle in the morning. The developer who built it, a man named Greg Hartman, married the woman who would become the association's president. And together they built a little kingdom of covenants and fines down in the flat, with a stone entrance sign and a private mailbox cluster and a list of rules about paint colors and fence heights and the acceptable species of lawn. I had no quarrel with any of it. A man can run his own subdivision however he likes. I waved at the trucks when they ground up the county road. I sold a strip of frontage to the road district so they could widen the lane for all the new traffic, and I shook the road commissioner's hand on it. I minded my own water and my own fences, and I thought, the way you do, that good fences and a recorded deed would be enough to be left alone. It was not enough, because Greg Hartman had run out of easy land to build on. The flat was full. The pasture was platted to its edges. The only direction left to expand was up the hill, onto the bench above the subdivision, toward my spring. And a luxury lot with no water is not a luxury lot. It is a view and a mortgage. He needed what came out of my grandfather's rock. And he had married a woman who believed that wanting a thing badly enough was the same as having a right to it. The first notice came on a Thursday in the fall, taped to my gate in a plastic sleeve, the kind of clear sleeve you slide a menu into. I saw it from the truck when I came back from town with feed for the chickens, a white sheet of paper trapped behind plastic on my own gate. And I sat there a moment with the engine running before I got out. It was an architectural compliance citation, the association claimed, for a spring house that predated the association by 60 years and sat entirely on my deeded land, 400 feet outside their platted boundary. The fine was $200. There was a line at the bottom for me to sign acknowledging the violation. I read it twice, standing in the gravel with the feed sack still in the truck bed. And then I took a photograph of it with my phone, and I peeled it carefully off the gate so as not to tear it, and I carried it inside and laid it flat on the kitchen table. I wrote the date and the time on the back of a fresh manila folder in pencil. Thursday. The folder was empty that day. It would not stay empty. I did not call Delia. I did not drive down to the flat and argue at her stone entrance sign. I drove the other direction, into town, to the county recorder's office, which I had walked into 1,000 times in my working life, where the woman at the counter, Sheila, had known me 20 years and still made me sign the same log as everybody else. I pulled my own chain of title and the recorded easement for the water line, and I had certified copies made, the kind with the raised seal pressed into the corner. And I paid the few dollars in cash, and I put those in the folder too, behind the citation. I want you to notice that I did not need those copies that day. Nobody had asked me for anything I could not prove with a phone call. I made them anyway. That is the whole discipline in one small act. You do not document for the argument you are having. You document for the hearing you do not yet know is coming. That was incident 1. I want to be plain about something before I go on. Because if you take nothing else from an old man's story, take this. I never raised my voice in any of it. Not once. A surveyor learns early that the ground does not care how loud you are. The corner is where the corner is. The deed says what the deed says. You can shout at a property line all day and into the night, and it will not move an inch. And the only person who hears you is yourself. So I did the only thing I have ever known how to do with a dispute. I measured it, I wrote it down, I dated it. And I waited. The way you wait for a survey crew to call back a reading from across a canyon, knowing the number is the number whether you like it or not. Incident 2 came that winter, on a cold, bright morning with frost still on the north sides of the fence posts. A man in a quilted vest with a clipboard and a laminated badge that said Pine Hollow Code Enforcement walked up my drive, his breath showing, and informed me he was there to inspect my spring house for safety violations. He had no county authority. He had no warrant. He had a badge he had clearly ordered off the internet, the kind with a gold eagle stamped on shiny plastic and his name spelled out in a font that no real agency has used in 40 years. I was in the doorway of my shop with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and I looked at the badge, and I looked at his clean white sneakers sinking into my frozen gravel. And I asked him one question. I asked him to name the statute that authorized a private homeowners association to inspect a structure standing on deeded private land outside its own boundary. He opened his mouth. He looked at his clipboard as if the answer might be printed there. It was not. He said he would have to check with the office, which is the thing people say when they have just discovered they do not have an office that can answer the question. He left. He backed his truck down my drive too fast and clipped my mailbox post and kept going. Ray filmed the whole thing from the porch, badge and sneakers and mailbox and all. And that night, we put the footage on both drives. I labeled the file, noted the date, and added the printed badge photo to the folder. 2. That spring, the harassment moved to my customers. I still did small survey jobs for neighbors, boundary checks, corner recovery, the kind of work a retired man does to stay useful and to keep his hand in. Delia began calling the people who hired me, telling them I was operating an unlicensed business in violation of community standards, that they should be careful, that the association took these things seriously. I was, of course, fully licensed, had been for 3 decades. And my license number was a matter of public record on the state board's website, where anyone with a phone could find it in under a minute. One of those customers was a rancher named Pete Salas, a square-built man of about my age whose family had run cattle in that valley longer than the Hartmans had been alive, longer than the subdivision, longer than the paved road. Pete called me the same afternoon he got the call from Delia, and he was so angry I had to ask him twice to slow down. He said she had told him I was a fraud and a danger, and that hiring me put his own standing with the association at risk, though Pete was not even a member and never had been. He said, "Walt, I have known you 30 years, and I have never known you to so much as round a number." He said he would put it in writing, every word she had said, with the date and the time, and he did. That very week, in his own hand on a sheet of ranch ledger paper. That affidavit went in the folder. 3. By the time the dam letter came, I had stopped being surprised by anything that crossed my gate. The dam was not really a dam. I want to be careful about the word because the word is what they hung their whole claim on. It was a low concrete weir my grandfather poured at the spring head to hold a small clear pool, no taller than my knee, the kind of thing ranchers built all over these mountains before anybody had heard the word permit said in anger. A man could step over it without lifting his boot high. Delia's association sent a formal demand that summer, on real letterhead now, with a lawyer's name printed at the bottom, ordering me to remove the weir within 30 days because it was, they claimed, impounding water that belonged to the downstream community. I read that letter standing at the kitchen table while Ray did her homework across from me, her pencil scratching, and I felt my jaw go tight and a heat come up the back of my neck. And I set the letter down on the table and I made myself pour a glass of water and drink all of it before I picked the letter back up. Ray watched me do it. She did not say anything. She had seen me do it before. When my hands were steady, I photographed the letter, filed it, and the next morning I drove to the county for the water decree. Here is the thing about water in the Mountain West, and it is worth your knowing even if you never set foot in a dry county in your life. Water is the most carefully recorded thing there is, more carefully than land, more carefully than money. Every drop that anyone has ever lawfully used has a date attached to it, a priority date. And the older the date, the stronger the right. And the rule is brutally simple, and it has not changed in 150 years. First in time, first in right. The man who put the water to use first stands at the front of the line, And in a dry year, he takes his full share before the man behind him takes a drop. My grandfather's water right was decreed by the court in 1951, with a priority date going back to actual beneficial use in 1948, the year he laid the line. The Pine Hollow subdivision's water claim was filed in the year they broke ground, a decade ago. In the eyes of the state engineer, who is the only authority that matters on the question, my grandfather stood 70 years ahead of them in line. And nothing Delia Hartman could record at the county, nothing she could vote on at a board meeting, nothing her lawyer could write on letterhead, would move him back so much as a single place. I had known this my whole working life. It was why I never truly worried, even on the bad days. Even so, I pulled the certified decree anyway and added it to the folder, because the folder was never for me. I already knew. The folder was for the day someone with real authority finally sat down and asked to see it. Incident 4 was the lawsuit. The association filed a civil action against me that summer, asking the court to quiet title to the easement and the water in the association's favor, and to order the weir removed at my expense. It came to my gate by a process server, a polite young man who apologized while he handed it over. And I thanked him, because none of this was his doing. It was a thick filing, 40 pages, full of confident language and Latin phrases, not one recorded instrument older than 10 years anywhere in it. I read every page at the kitchen table over 2 evenings, with a yellow legal pad beside me, noting each claim and the document that answered it. For every paragraph of theirs, I could write one line. Their claim, my decree. Their claim, my easement. Their claim, the boundary survey I had run myself. By the time I finished, there was not a single assertion in 40 pages that the record did not flatly contradict. Still, a lawsuit you can answer on paper is a lawsuit you have to live under, and it sat on the house like weather. So I went to see a man I had known for years, a deputy named Ortiz, steady and unhurried, the kind of officer who reads the whole report before he says a word. I caught him at the diner in town, and I sat down across from him with the folder. And I asked him plainly what it would take for the county to do something about a private association behaving like a government. Ortiz turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the table and gave me the truth, which is what I had always respected about him. He said as long as it stayed paperwork and citations, his hands were tied. Because a filed complaint has to be processed, whether it has any merit or not. And a civil suit is for the civil court, not the sheriff. Then he leaned in and told me the part that mattered. He said the line gets crossed the day they put hands on your property or your person without lawful authority. He said, until then, build the pattern. Document every single contact. Date it, photograph it, keep the footage. He said, the day they cross that line, you call me first, before you call anyone else. And you do not touch them, and you do not say a word to them. You just call me, and you stand back and you let them finish crossing it where a camera can see. I wrote down what he said on the legal pad that night, word for word. 4 documented incidents in the folder, and now a deputy who had told me, almost kindly, exactly what the 5th one would have to look like. I did not have to wait long, and the next part is where it stopped being about fines and started being about my daughter. That fall, on a Monday morning, a crew of 3 men in an unmarked truck pulled up to my gate with bolt cutters and a portable generator and a concrete saw, and they began cutting the chain on my gate to get equipment up to the weir. They had a work order, they said, signed by the association. They did not have a court order because no court had ruled on anything. Ray was home that morning, sick from school, and she saw them from the upstairs window, and she called me where I was standing in the shop. And her voice was not the voice of a girl who films things calmly anymore. It was high and it was breaking. She said there were men cutting the gate. She said one of them had looked up at the house. I told her to lock the door, stay upstairs, and call Deputy Ortiz. And I told her I was already moving. I want to tell you I stayed calm. My body did. My hands did what they have always done. Something cold and very old moved through me on that walk up from the shop. The kind of cold a man feels exactly once or twice in a life. And I have never forgotten it. I reached the gate as Ortiz's cruiser came up the lane behind the unmarked truck, lights turning. The men with the saw stopped. The foreman started talking about a work order and community standards and functional jurisdiction, all the words Delia had trained them to say. And Ortiz held up one hand and asked the only question that mattered. He asked to see the court order authorizing them to cut a lock and enter private property. There was no court order. There was a piece of association letterhead. Ortiz told them to put the saw down and step back across the line. And they did. Because a real badge had finally entered the conversation. That was Incident 5. And it was the one that crossed over. Exactly as Ortiz had said it would. Delia arrived 20 minutes later in her white SUV with the vanity plate. Blazer the color of a road flare. Sunglasses pushed up on her head. And she came up that drive like she owned the gravel under her own kitten heels. She did not look at the deputy. She did not look at the men she had sent. She looked at me, and she said the thing I will remember to my last day. She said, "You don't seem to understand. This community decided. You're functionally inside our jurisdiction, whether your little papers say so or not. And we will keep coming until you comply." I did not answer her. I had learned by then that the worst thing you can do to a person like Delia Hartman is decline to give her the fight she came for. I just looked at Ortiz, and Ortiz looked at the cut chain on my gate, and something in his face had changed. What I did not know that morning, what nobody on my side of the gate knew, was that Delia Hartman had already been sold out by the one person she trusted most, and that the folder which would end all of this was not in my shop. It was in a briefcase, on a passenger seat, coming up the mountain toward me at that very moment. Let me back up, because this is the part the title promised you. And it is the part I did not see coming. 3 weeks before the men came with the saw, a woman I had never met had knocked on my door on a quiet weekday afternoon. She was in her 50s, plainly dressed, and she introduced herself as Marianne. And she said she had been the treasurer of the Pine Hollow Owners Association for 6 years, and that she could not be part of it anymore. She did not come in. She stood on my porch with a leather folder held against her chest like a shield, and she told me, in a low, steady voice, that the association's pursuit of my water had never been about community standards. It was about money. Greg Hartman's development company had pre-sold 11 luxury lots on the upper bench of the subdivision. Lots that had no legal water supply of their own, lots he could not deliver or close on unless he could attach them to a senior water right. Mine. The whole campaign of fines and inspectors and lawsuits had one purpose, which was to frighten me into signing a release that would let him tap my grandfather's spring and close 11 sales worth, by her accounting, just over $4 million. Marianne had kept records. Of course she had. Treasurers keep records the way surveyors keep records, because the numbers are the only thing that does not lie. In her folder were the association's board minutes, the ones never shown to the membership, in which Greg laid out the plan in his own words. There were the pre-sale contracts, contingent on water. There were emails between Delia and the association's lawyer discussing how to manufacture enough violations to justify the lien, and there was the thing that mattered most, the thing that turned a property dispute into a criminal one. There was a fabricated county inspection report, forged on a template made to look official, that Greg had commissioned to tell the 11 buyers the water was already secured. He had taken their deposits on the strength of a document he knew was false. I asked Marion why she was bringing this to me, a stranger, instead of to a lawyer or the state. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said her own mother had been pushed off a piece of land by people exactly like the Hartmans years ago in another state. And she had watched it happen and done nothing. And she was done watching. She handed me the folder. She smiled, a small, tired smile, the smile of a person setting down a weight they have carried too long. She said, "Use it well." Then she walked back down my drive to her car and drove away. And I stood on my porch holding the thing that would end 4 years of this in a single afternoon. I did not use it that day. I want you to understand the discipline of this, because it is the whole lesson. I had in my hands enough to destroy them, and I sat on it for 3 weeks. Because a thing produced at the wrong moment is just an accusation, and a thing produced at the right moment in front of the right authority is a verdict. I copied everything to 2 drives. I added Marion's folder to my own, and now the folder was not 4 inches thick, it was the entire case, and I waited for the venue. The day they cut my gate was the day the county finally had to act, whether it wanted to or not. Ortiz's report turned a private nuisance into a criminal trespass and a destruction of private property. With a sworn officer as the eyewitness, and the district attorney's office, which had spent years letting the civil paperwork gather dust in a drawer, suddenly had a real case in its hands, with a deputy at the center of it. A hearing was set, not a quiet civil hearing buried 4 deep in the docket, where nobody would ever see it, but an open public session before the county commissioners, because the association had, in the same arrogant breath, also petitioned the county to formally recognize its claim to the entire upper watershed. They had wanted it public. They had wanted the county's stamp pressed onto their claim in front of an audience. They got a public room, all right. They got every chair in it filled. The hearing was on a Wednesday morning in the commissioner's chamber. A plain room with a worn wooden floor and folding metal chairs and a long table at the front, where the 3 commissioners sat with a clerk to one side. Delia came in her best blazer, a deep wine color this time, with her lawyer in a gray suit beside her, and Greg 2 seats down in a sport coat that did not quite close over his belt. The 11 upper bench buyers had been invited by the association to fill the room and show community support, which meant that the chamber was packed with the very people Greg had defrauded, sitting shoulder to shoulder in their good clothes. Not one of them yet knowing it. Ray sat beside me in the second row, in the dark blue dress she had picked herself, her hands folded in her lap, watching everything the way she watches everything. Pete Salas was there in a clean pressed shirt, arms crossed. Deputy Ortiz stood at the back along the wall with his hat in his hands. And on the far side of the room, alone, in the same gray cardigan, sat Marion, who had told no one she would come, and who caught my eye once and gave me the smallest nod. Delia spoke first, and she was good at it. I will give her that much. She stood and she talked about community, about protecting property values, about the safety of families downstream, about a stubborn holdout on the hill endangering everyone below him. She used the word jurisdiction 4 separate times, counting them off like beads. Her voice was warm and reasonable and practiced, and a stranger walking in off the street would have believed every word. Her lawyer rose and laid out the civil filing in careful language. The quiet title action, the demand on the water, the weir. And then Chairman Dwyer, a slow, careful man with reading glasses, pushed down his nose, asked if there was anyone present who wished to respond. And the room went still, and I stood up. And I walked to the front of that worn wooden floor with a folder under my arm. I did not make a speech. I have heard since that people in that room expected one. The angry old man finally getting his turn to shout. I did not give them that. I laid 3 things on the table in front of the commissioners, one at a time, and I named each one as I set it down. The flat way you read coordinates off a plat to a crew that cannot see what you see. The first was the recorded water decree. Certified, the raised seal catching the light. Priority date 1948, 70 years senior, to every claim the association had ever filed. I set it down and I said what it was. The second was the recorded easement for the water line, in my family's name, recorded 60 years before the subdivision existed. I set it beside the first. I said, this is the senior right, recorded at this county, in this very building, and any clerk you have can confirm it against the books in 10 minutes. Chairman Dwyer looked at me over his glasses, and then he sent the clerk out of the room to pull the originals. And the chamber waited in a silence you could feel on your skin. And the clerk came back after a few minutes and bent and said something low in Dwyer's ear and nodded. And Dwyer's face settled into something hard and final. Then I laid down the third thing, and the third thing was not mine. And the room did not know that yet. It was the forged county inspection report from Marion's folder. And I set beside it the genuine county records showing that no such inspection had ever been performed or filed. And beside that, I set 2 of the 11 pre-sale contracts, the ones written contingent on a water supply that did not exist and never had. I did not raise my voice. I said only this. I said, the association has not been trying to protect a community. It has been trying to take a senior water right by force, through fines and a false inspector and a lawsuit and 3 men with a saw, in order to close 11 lot sales that were sold to the people sitting in this room on the strength of a county document that this county never issued. And then I did the one thing I had planned, the only move I made that was aimed at anyone. I turned away from the commissioners and away from Delia, and I looked directly at the 11 buyers in their good clothes. And I said, you should each ask to see the inspection report you were shown when you put your money down, and then walk it down the hall and ask the county whether it is real. The room did not erupt. It went very quiet, which is far worse if you happen to be the Hartmans. I have stood in a lot of quiet rooms. This one had a particular weight to it, the weight of 11 people doing arithmetic at the same time. Greg stood up too fast, and his folding chair went over backward and hit the floor with a flat clap that made everyone flinch. Delia said my name once, sharp, like a teacher. And then she said nothing else at all, because her lawyer had closed his hand around her forearm, the way a lawyer does when his client is 1 sentence away from confessing into a public record that the clerk is still typing. Chairman Dwyer looked down at the forged document on the table for a long moment without touching it. Then he asked Deputy Ortiz to come forward from the back wall, and he asked the county attorney to step in, and he closed the association's petition then and there, denied with a single word and the flat of his hand on the table. The whole reversal, 4 years of it, took less time than it takes to walk a long fence line and check the corners. The consequences fell exactly where they had been aimed, which is the part that still strikes me as just, whenever I think about it, Greg Hartman had built his whole expansion on water he did not own and had never owned. And so the 11 upper lots, with no senior right and now a fraud investigation attached to every one of them, could not close. Not one. The $4 million in sales evaporated like spring snow. The deposits had to be returned, every dollar, to the 11 families who had walked into that hearing as Delia's supporters and walked out as victims and witnesses. The forged inspection report became the centerpiece of a criminal case for fraud, handed up by the county attorney within the month. And the development company that had bullied an entire valley for a decade filed for bankruptcy before the next spring. Delia was removed as president by her own membership in an emergency vote. The very membership she had stood up and claimed to speak for, and not one of them voted to keep her. The jurisdiction she had invoked 4 times in a single morning turned out to be the exact channel through which the county undid her. Because the moment she petitioned that public body, she put herself and her records inside its reach. I will give you the paired numbers because they are the heart of it, and you should be able to hold them both in your hand at once. My folder held 4 years of incidents, 5 documented escalations, dozens of dated photographs, 2 sworn affidavits, and 0 fines ever lawfully collected against me. Not $1, because not one citation they ever wrote had any authority behind it. Her side held 11 fraudulent contracts, 1 forged government document, and just over $4 million in losses that became debts. You could stand in that worn wooden room and point at both columns and feel the gap between them open up like a canyon. I did not gloat. There was nothing for me to say that the documents had not already said far better and far more quietly than I ever could. I picked up my own 2 sheets, the decree and the easement, and folded them back into the folder. And the forged report I left lying on the table where the county attorney could take custody of it. Then I walked back to the second row and sat down next to my daughter. And Ray reached over and took my hand and held it. And that was the only thing in that whole crowded room that I actually cared about. The rest was just arithmetic finally being read aloud. We drove home up the mountain in the old truck, the 2 of us. And Ray was quiet for a long while, watching the pines go by her window. Then she said, without turning her head, "Mom would have liked that you didn't yell." I had to keep my eyes hard on the road for a minute, because the road went blurry and I did not trust my voice to answer her right away. That evening, when the light was going long and gold the way it had been the day Marion came, I walked up the path to the spring house the way I had, every single morning for years. And I filled the blue enamel pitcher that Carol used to fill. And the water ran out of the rock cold and clean and steady the way it had since before I was born. The way it would keep running long after I was gone, and Ray was old. Ray came up the path behind me with the dog. An old blue heeler named Scout, who had slept through the entire war at the gate that morning and most of the 4 years before it. And the 3 of us stood at the spring head in the last of the light. On land that was still ours, fed by water that was still ours. And for the first time in 4 years, I let myself feel that the thing was over, and that we had not lost 1 inch of it. So here is the lesson plainly, because you came all this way, and you have earned it. If someone with a clipboard tells you that your land is functionally theirs, do not argue with them. Arguing is what they want. Go to the county recorder instead and pull your deed, your easement, your water decree, whatever instrument governs the thing they are trying to take, and read it against the ground. Make certified copies. Start a folder the day the first notice arrives. Write the date and time on everything, and save your footage to 2 places. Talk to your neighbors, because the person who hires you and the person who sits on their board both see things you cannot. And when someone from inside the thing that is hurting you knocks quietly on your door with a folder of their own, treat them with the respect that took to come. Patience is not weakness. Documentation is not cowardice. The oldest recorded right wins, and it wins quietly, in a public room, in 10 minutes, if you are prepared. If you have ever stood at your own gate and been told your land was not really yours, tell me about it below, because I read every one. Subscribe if you want to stay for the next one. Because next week I want to tell you about the retired bridge engineer whose HOA tried to condemn the only road to his cabin, never once asking who had built and still legally owned that road. His name was on the bridge. They never looked up. I'll see you then.